Ryan Barath here with GolfWRX, and I am here to answer one of the most common questions I get about club building, and that is when to use a shim and how to install with one. Because a lot of stuff that I build is either going to be parallel into parallel or taper into taper, but in this case I'm installing a taper into parallel, which is pretty common depending on the club heads that you're building, and in some cases some shafts only come in taper tip, so you have to use a shim if you're putting them into a parallel head. That's all there is to it. Now in this case it's a steel taper tip into an iron head that I'm going to use as a demo, just for some fun. Now here's why you need to use one, because if you don't, you're going to get too much shaft lean when you go to install, and that's going to create problems down the line, and depending on the shaft you're using, could actually weaken that point, cause extra stress, and potentially cause breakage. Not only that, but your lie and lofts are going to be all over the place. Here's an example of a head that is taper and doesn't need the shim. It's pretty snug. There's no epoxy in there, there's no shafting beads, and once I were to install this, then it's going to be pretty much bang on. This one, not so much. As you can see, there's a lot more movement there. And because of that, I'm going to use a shim. It's going to snug it right up, and it's going to sit bang on right in the bore of the hosel, and I'm not going to have any issues moving forward. So this is the process. I already have my shim. Now just for an example, I have two different versions here. This is a wood shim, so it's about 1 inch long. Generally going to be used for 335 to 350. And then I also have this one here. So this is a 355 taper to 370. The taper is a lot shorter because it's going into an iron head, and you really only need to secure that bottom part to make sure that it's going to sit nice and snug in the hosel. So I have my shim, I have my ferrule, I've already got my epoxy. I've gone through the whole process of making sure that the head is completely bored out. I've cleaned it out with my wire brush. I've used acetone to clean out the inside of the head and the shaft, and this is the process. First things first, a little bit of epoxy on the end of the shaft, inside of the ferrule to make sure that it stays on. A lot of times what ends up happening is if you don't put a little bit of epoxy underneath the ferrule, after a period of time it's going to move up. This just helps prevent that from happening. Now that I have it seated, I'm going to do what I always do, and that is clean the top to make sure I don't have any extra epoxy after the fact, and you can see I just got a little bit there. Now here's the thing, I actually can't just push this on all the way, because if I set that ferrule all the way to that depth, what ends up happening is when I use the shim, I'm now going to have a gap. I don't want to have a gap there, so I'm going to leave it. It's not fully installed all the way to the end. That only happens once I do final putting the head on, everything's installed, and I bang it down into place, make sure it's at the bottom of the bore, and set it up to dry. Next step is making sure that the shim, you can see here, is past the depth of the bottom of the ferrule. That means when I go to actually install it, it's not gonna break along the top, it's not gonna bend the shim, and it's gonna make sure that it stays intact. So let's put this thing together. I'm gonna put a little bit of epoxy inside of that iron head already. So that's good to go. I'm going to take my tip weight, put a little bit of epoxy on it as well, put it inside of the shaft. Make sure that it's nice and coated, as you can see. On goes the shim. That's all set. I'm gonna add just a little bit more epoxy on the outside of the shim. Once you've got the tip weight in there, you can essentially use almost as much epoxy as you want, because it's going to come out the sides, and that's why we can clean it. That way we know that the whole thing is coated. Now, last but not least, the iron head goes on. I know there's already epoxy on the inside. Try and line the graphics up as best as possible. And that is a sign that we are getting very close. So the epoxy is coming out between the top of the hosel and the ferrule. So I give it a quick little wipe. Again, the more work that I do now means at the end of this process, when I go to turn the ferrule down and shine it up, I don't have to worry about cleaning or any extra cleaning that needs to really be done, because I've already gone through that process. It's also a lot easier to clean damp epoxy than it is stuff that's already cured to the hosel. So now that that's in, Graphics are lined up where I want it to be. I know it's not at the final bore depth, so that's the sound of it all set. Make sure the graphics are lined up, and you can see there's no wiggle, which means that shim is doing its job. It means when it cures, it's going to be completely centered in the hosel. To the wall, let it dry, and that's it. In about 12 hours, we'll be able to, well, not exactly 12 hours because you still got to cut it, grip it, but you know, pretty soon we're going to have the thing fully assembled. We're going to be able to test it out and have some fun. If you have any questions, remember, please use the comment section below. If you like this video, remember to subscribe to the channel. Every time we put something up when it comes to club building or answering questions or any of those things, you can get a notification and you can tune in to see what we're up to next. And remember, thanks for watching.